The room was filled with laughter, sharp and merciless. Under the glittering lights of an elite celebration, Mariatu Kamara stood frozen, her heart pounding as mocking eyes cut into her from every direction, whispers turned into open ridicule, fingers pointed, smiles twisted with cruelty. Beside her, her husband, dismissed by everyone as a poor builder, lowered his gaze, his silence heavier than any insult. No one noticed the way his jaw tightened. No one sensed the storm building behind his calm eyes. And no one knew that before this night ended, the truth would shatter every voice laughing in that room. Before we begin the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move, you don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Mariatu Kamara had learned the meaning of hardship long before she understood the word itself. She grew up in a narrow row of aging houses on the edge of the city where the paint peeled like tired skin and the roofs groaned whenever the rain came too hard. Mornings began early for her, not with dreams or laughter, but with responsibility. Before the sun fully rose, Mariatu was already awake, sweeping the dusty compound, fetching water, and helping her mother prepare whatever small goods they would sell that day. Her mother, Madame Hawa Kamara, was a woman shaped by disappointment. Life had taught her to measure safety in money and respect in appearances. Love to her was a luxury for people who could afford to be poor later. Mariatu. She would often say, tying her headscarf tightly, "A woman who marries without security is choosing suffering with open eyes." Mariatu never argued. She listened. She always listened. At school, she was quiet but sharp. Teachers noticed her discipline, her patience, the way she finished tasks without complaint. But education was expensive, and dreams did not pay rent. When her father died suddenly, the weight of survival settled fully on her young shoulders. University plans dissolved quietly, without drama, without goodbye. She learned to sew, to bargain, to smile at customers even when her hands ached and her stomach was empty. And through it all, she carried herself with a dignity that surprised people who looked too closely at her worn shoes. Yet society does not reward dignity without money. By her mid-20s, the whispers had started. She's kind, but kindness doesn't feed children. She's pretty, but pretty fades. She needs a man with connections. That was when Kofi Mensah entered her life. Kofi was everything people approved of, well-dressed, well-spoken, confident in the way only men who had never truly struggled could be. He drove a clean car, wore expensive watches, and spoke endlessly about the future, as if it were something he personally owned. When he chose Mariatu, people nodded in satisfaction. "You're lucky," her friends said. "Don't make mistakes," her uncle warned. "This is your way out," her mother reminded her daily. At first, Mariatu tried to be grateful. Kofi took her to places she had only seen through glass windows, restaurants with soft music, events with laughter that felt rehearsed. He introduced her proudly until he didn't. Slowly, his tone changed. "You shouldn't talk too much in front of my colleagues. Maybe don't wear that. It looks simple. You wouldn't understand how business works." The words were never shouted. They didn't need to be. They settled into Mariatu's heart, quietly teaching her to shrink herself without realizing it. One evening after a long day at work, Mariatu asked a simple question. "Kofi, do you ever think people matter more than money?" He laughed, not cruelly but dismissively. "That's how poor people talk," he said. "Money decides who listens." That night, Mariatu lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange emptiness she could not explain. When Kofi ended the relationship, it was quick and clean. He said he needed someone more aligned with his ambitions. Weeks later, word spread that he was seeing Yvonne, a woman from a wealthy family, sharp-tongued and polished. Mariatu accepted it without drama. Pain to her had never been something she announced. What hurt more was the reaction around her. "You should have tried harder. At least he wasn't poor. Now, what will you do?" Even Uncle Bashir Kamara, who visited one afternoon uninvited, shook his head in disappointment. "You let opportunity walk away," he said bluntly. "Love doesn't pay hospital bills." Mariatu said nothing. She served him tea and watched him speak as if her life were a failed investment. That same week, fate shifted quietly. On her way home from delivering finished dresses to a customer, Mariatu took a shortcut past a construction site. The road was uneven, noisy, alive with the sounds of labor metal, clanging voices shouting directions, machines groaning under effort. She was about to pass when a sharp cry cut through the air. "Careful." A plank slipped. A young worker stumbled. For a split second, everything froze. Then a man moved. He grabbed the falling beam with raw force, pushing the worker out of the way. Dust exploded into the air. The plank crashed harmlessly beside them. When the dust settled, Mariatu saw him clearly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his clothes stained with cement and sweat. His hands were rough, his face calm, in a way that suggested he was used to responsibility, not just physical, but moral. "Are you all right?" he asked the shaken worker. The man nodded, breathing hard. "Thank you, Serena." That was the first time Mariatu heard the name Serena fall. She should have walked away. Instead, she lingered, unsure why her heart felt suddenly awake. Serena noticed her watching and gave a small, polite nod. No pride, no performance. "Sorry for the noise," he said gently. "It's fine," Mariatu replied. "You saved him." Serena shrugged as if it were nothing worth mentioning. "That's what we're here for." Their conversation was brief, ordinary, almost forgettable. And yet as Mariatu walked away, she realized something unsettling. For the first time in a long while, she had been seen, not evaluated, not measured, not judged, just seen. She didn't know then that this quiet moment on a dusty road was the beginning of everything society had warned her against, and everything her heart had been waiting for. Mariatu did not expect to see Serena fall again. Life had taught her not to expect kindness twice from the same place. Moments passed, people faded, and the city swallowed small encounters without apology. Yet 2 days after the incident at the construction site, Mariatu found herself walking the same dusty road again, a bundle of finished clothes balanced carefully in her arms. She told herself it was coincidence. The sound of hammering echoed ahead. Workers moved like ants across steel frames, their bodies glistening under the harsh sun. Mariatu slowed her steps, unsure why her heart began to beat a little faster. Then she saw him. Serena stood near a half-built wall, giving instructions calmly, not shouting, not posturing. The men around him listened, not because they feared him, but because they trusted him. When someone made a mistake, he corrected it without humiliation. When a worker paused to wipe sweat from his face, Serena handed him water without a word. Mariatu watched from a distance, surprised by the tightness in her chest. She had known men who demanded respect. She had known men who bought it. But this was different. Serena noticed her again. This time he smiled. "You're passing here often," he said as she approached. She laughed softly, embarrassed. "It's the shortest road home." "Then it's a good road," he replied. They spoke while the noise of the site carried on around them. Simple conversation. Where she worked, what she did, where he was from. He did not ask questions that felt invasive. He did not boast. When she asked about him, he answered plainly. "I'm a builder," he said. Nothing more. Mariatu nodded, surprised at how relieved she felt by the simplicity of his answer. As days turned into weeks, those brief encounters became something she quietly looked forward to. Sometimes they spoke for 5 minutes, sometimes only exchanged smiles and greetings. Once, when rain caught her unexpectedly, Serene lent her his jacket without hesitation, walking back into the storm without it. "You'll catch a cold," she protested. He shrugged. "I've been wet before." No man had ever said something like that to her without meaning something else. At home, Madame Hawa Kamara noticed the change in her daughter. "You're smiling more," she said one evening, suspicion lacing her tone. "What's making you happy?" Mariatu hesitated. "I met someone." Her mother's hands froze mid-motion. "Who?" "A man. He's kind. He works hard." Madame Hawa frowned. "What does he do?" "He's a builder." The silence that followed was heavy. "A builder," her mother repeated slowly. "Mariatu, do you want to suffer?" "It's honest work," Mariatu said quietly. Her mother shook her head. "Honesty doesn't buy land," Mariatu did not argue. She had learned that battles chosen too early were battles lost. Outside the house, the world continued to remind her of expectations. Friends teased her. Neighbors whispered. Uncle Bashir Kamara, ever watchful, delivered his opinion uninvited. "You're not a girl anymore," he said one afternoon. "Time is not on your side. Choose wisely." Mariatu smiled politely and said nothing. What no one understood was how Serigna made her feel when he listened. When she spoke of her fears, he did not dismiss them. When she spoke of her past, he did not judge it. He never tried to impress her with promises or projections. He spoke about effort, patience, and doing what needed to be done one day at a time. Once she asked him why he never complained. He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Complaining doesn't move walls," he said. "Work does. It was the first time Mariatu realized she trusted him. Their first real outing was not planned. After work, Serena walked her to a small roadside cafe. The chairs were plastic, the table uneven. But the tea was hot and the laughter came easily. A group of men nearby stared openly. "Builder thinks he can date above his level," one of them muttered, not quietly enough. Mariatu stiffened. She waited for Serena to react, to defend himself, to lash out, to explain. He didn't. He simply met her eyes and said gently, "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head. "No." And just like that, the words of strangers lost their power. But the world was not done testing them. News travels fast in communities hungry for drama. It didn't take long for Kofi Mensah to hear about Mariatu's new companion. One evening, as Mariatu locked up her shop, Kofi's car pulled up smoothly beside her. "You've moved on quickly," he said, stepping out with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Mariatu felt her stomach tighten. "What do you want, Kofi?" "I heard you're dating a builder," he said, amused. "Is that true?" She lifted her chin. "Yes," Kofi laughed openly. "Mariatu, is this revenge or desperation?" Neither answer would have satisfied him. She chose silence. "You always had potential," he continued. "Don't waste it." That night, Mariatu cried not because she doubted herself, but because she was tired of being measured. When she told Serena what happened, she expected anger. Instead, he listened quietly. "Does he still matter to you?" Serena asked. "No," she said immediately. "He never did the way I thought." Serena nodded. "Then let him talk." She studied his face, searching for insecurity, jealousy, anything that would betray weakness. She found none. Weeks later, Serena invited her to meet someone important to him. He didn't say who, just that it mattered. They met in a modest office building near the city center. Inside, a man stood as soon as Serena entered, greeting him with visible respect. "Sir," the man began, then stopped, glancing at Mariatu. Serena raised a hand gently. "It's fine." Mariatu noticed the way the man's posture shifted, the way his voice softened. "This is Mr. Emmanuel Okonkwo," Serena said simply. "A colleague." They spoke briefly. Business words Mariatu didn't fully understand floated through the air: deadlines, permits, investments. It felt bigger than she expected. On the way out, she asked carefully, "Are you more than just a builder?" Serena stopped walking. For a moment, she thought she had asked too much. Then he said, "I am exactly who I told you I was." She nodded, choosing trust. What she did not see was the look exchanged behind them, the silent understanding between men who knew the truth. Nor did she know that every step she took beside Serena Fall was drawing her closer to a storm that would shake everything she thought she knew about love, worth, and power. But for now, as they walked under the fading sun, Mariatu felt something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. The moment Mariatu Kamara realized the world had begun watching her was the day she noticed people no longer whispered behind her back, but in front of her face. It started subtly. At the market, a woman she had known for years looked her up and down and asked casually, "So, is it true you're seeing a construction worker now? Not a man, not someone you like, a construction worker." Mariatu smiled politely. "His name is Serigna." The woman raised her eyebrows, unimpressed. I hope you know what you're doing." At her shop, customers lingered longer than usual, pretending to examine dresses while studying her expression. She used to date Kofi Mensah, someone whispered loudly enough. And now this, another replied. Mariatu heard everything. She always had. What surprised her was how much less it hurt than she expected. Because when the day ended, when her feet ached and her hands were sore, Serigna Fall was waiting. He never asked her to explain the looks, never demanded reassurance. He walked beside her at an easy pace, carrying her bag without making it a performance. "You've been quiet," he said one evening. "I'm thinking," she replied honestly. "About what?" "About how loud people become when your choices don't belong to them." Serena chuckled softly. "They're only loud when they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you might be happy without following their rules." That night, Mariatu slept deeply. But the resistance was growing. At home, Madame Hawa Kamara stopped hiding her disapproval. "You are embarrassing this family," she said bluntly during dinner. "People are talking. People always talk." Mariatu replied gently. Her mother slammed her spoon down. "They talk differently when your daughter could have married comfort and chose struggle instead." "He is not struggle," Mariatu said quietly. "He is peace." Madame Hawa laughed bitterly. "Peace does not pay school fees." The argument ended the way most of their arguments did, with silence heavy enough to bruise. Only Aissatou Diallo, Mariatu's closest friend, stood firmly by her side. "People don't hate your relationship," Aissatou said one afternoon as they walked together. "They hate that you're brave enough to choose it." Mariatu smiled sadly. "I didn't know loving someone would feel like rebellion." Sirigny felt the pressure too. At the construction site, workers began to tease him openly. "So the Taylor girl has captured our boss." One joked. "Careful," another laughed. "Next thing you'll forget where you came from." Sirigny smiled, unfazed. "I know exactly where I come from." But there were moments, quiet, unguarded moments, when Mariatu caught him staring off into the distance as if calculating something far beyond the walls they were building. One evening, Sirigny asked her to walk with him through a neighborhood she had never visited before. The houses were neat guarded. The air felt different. "Do you live here?" she asked. "No," he said simply. "But I work around here sometimes." They sat on a low wall as the sun dipped behind rooftops. "Mariatu," he began. Carefully, "has anyone ever told you that loving the wrong person can cost you everything?" She thought of Kofi, of her mother's fears, of the looks. "Yes," she answered. "Everyone." He nodded. "And does it scare you?" She looked at him fully. "Only if I believe them." That was the moment Sirigny knew. Not that she loved him, but that she stood with him. Yet the past was not done reaching for her. Kofi Mensah reappeared at her shop one afternoon, uninvited and unwelcome. "So this is how you live now," he said, glancing around dismissively. Mariatu kept sewing. "If you came to insult me, you're wasting your time." Kofi leaned closer. "I came to warn you." "About what?" "About men who hide behind simplicity," he said. "A builder has no future to offer you." Mariatu finally looked up. "And you had money but no respect." The words struck harder than she expected. Kofi straightened, his pride wounded. "You think love will protect you when reality arrives?" "No," Mariatu said calmly. "But it will help me face it." That evening, Sirigny noticed her tension immediately. "He came," she said before he could ask. Sirigny's jaw tightened, not in anger but in restraint. "And he asked, and he reminded me why I chose you." They stood in silence for a long moment. "Mariatu," Sirigny said finally, "there are things about me you don't know." She met his eyes. "I don't need to know everything to trust you." His breath caught just slightly. Days later, the inevitable happened. Uncle Bashir Kamara called a family meeting. Everyone was there, faces tight with judgment, voices sharp with expectation. "You are making a mistake," Bashir said openly. "We raised you better." "I was raised to be honest," Mariatu replied. "You were raised to survive," Madame Hawa added. Sirigny stood quietly at Mariatu's side, absorbing every insult without interruption. "Do you know how people talk about him?" Bashir scoffed. "A builder, no land, no title." Sirigny finally spoke. "I may not have titles you respect," he said evenly, "but I will never let Mariatu feel small." The room went silent. Mariatu felt tears burn behind her eyes, not of sadness, but of something dangerously close to hope. The meeting ended badly. No blessings were given, no approval earned. Outside, Mariatu exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what Sirigny asked, for dragging you into this." He shook his head. "You didn't drag me. I chose this." That night, as they sat together under a dim streetlight, Sirigny took her hand. "I don't have everything the world says you need," he said, "but I have a life I want to build with you." Mariatu squeezed his hand. "Then let them laugh." He smiled softly. "They will stop," he said. She didn't know why, but something in his voice made her believe him. Because behind the dust and simplicity, behind the silence and restraint, Sirigny Fall was carrying a truth powerful enough to turn mockery into silence. And the world was about to learn what it meant to underestimate a man who chose humility over applause. The first public wound was never the deepest, but it was always the most visible. Mariatu Kamara learned that on the night Kofi Mensah decided to remind everyone who he believed he was. The invitation arrived folded neatly inside an envelope delivered by a courier who smiled too brightly. It was for a business networking event at a newly renovated hotel downtown, an event Kofi had helped sponsor. The card carried prestige like perfume. "You don't have to go," Aissatou Diallo said when Mariatu showed her. "It feels like a trap." Mariatu studied the elegant lettering. That's exactly why I should. She didn't tell Serigny Fall at first, not because she wanted to hide anything, but because she didn't want him to feel he needed to protect her. She had spent too much of her life being shielded by fear. When she finally did tell him, he listened quietly. "Do you want me there?" he asked. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I want to walk in with my husband." The hotel lobby glowed with polished marble and glass. Men in tailored suits laughed easily. Women moved like reflections of wealth, careful, composed, rehearsed. Cameras flashed. Names were exchanged. Judgments were made within seconds. The moment Mariatu stepped inside, she felt it. The pause, the recognition, the recalculation. She married the builder, someone whispered. Serena stood tall beside her, his jacket clean but modest, his posture calm. He did not flinch when eyes skimmed past him dismissively. Kofi spotted them almost immediately. His smile widened not with joy but with opportunity. "Mariatu," he called loud enough for heads to turn. "You made it." She approached with Serigny, her chin lifted. "Kofi," she replied evenly. He looked Serigny up and down, slowly, deliberately. "And this must be your husband." Serigny extended his hand. "Serigny Fall." Kofi glanced at the hand, then ignored it. "I hear construction is booming," he said lightly. "For those willing to work hard." The insult hung between them, thinly disguised as conversation. Serigny withdrew his hand without comment. "Hard work has always been honest," he said. Kofi chuckled. "Honest doesn't always mean profitable." Before Mariatu could respond, Yvonne Mensah appeared radiant, expensive, sharp-eyed. "So this is her," she said, not bothering to hide her assessment. "I expected more." Mariatu felt the familiar burn, but this time something steadier rose beneath it. "This is my husband," she said clearly. "And this is my life." Yvonne smiled thinly. "Of course, everyone chooses what they can afford." Laughter rippled nearby, soft, cutting. Serenia's jaw tightened. Kofi raised a glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said suddenly, a toast to ambition and to knowing your place. Eyes turned. Glasses lifted. Mariatu felt the room tilt. For a moment, the old instinct to disappear clawed at her chest. Then she felt Serenia's hand in hers. Grounded. Solid. Kofi continued, enjoying the attention. "Some people are born to build companies. Others, to build walls." The laughter was louder this time. That was when Mariatu stepped forward. "Walls keep people safe," she said, her voice steady. "And companies collapse when they forget the people who build them." Silence rippled outward. Kofi's smile faltered just for a second. Serigny turned to her, surprise flickering in his eyes. Pride followed. Yvonne scoffed. "This isn't a charity seminar, Mariatu." "No," Mariatu replied. "It's a mirror." She turned and walked away, Serena beside her, leaving whispers and stares in their wake. Outside, the air felt cleaner. "I'm sorry," Mariatu said quietly. "I thought I was ready. You were." Serena replied. "You just didn't know how strong you'd have to be." They stood beneath the hotel lights, the city humming around them. "You didn't have to endure that," she added. Serigny looked at her. "Mariatu, I've endured worse for less." That night, news traveled faster than truth. Photos appeared online. Captions dripped with mockery. Comments multiplied like flies. She downgraded. "Love doesn't pay bills. He'll leave her poor." Madame Hawa Kamara confronted her daughter the next morning. "They humiliated you," she said, pacing, "and you let it happen." "No," Mariatu replied calmly. "They revealed themselves." Her mother stared at her, searching for weakness. She found none. At the construction site, the jokes grew bolder. "Boss saw your wife on the internet," a worker teased. "Famous now." Serigny smiled faintly. Fame fades. But later, alone in his office, he closed the door and sat in silence. Mr. Emmanuel Okonkwo entered without knocking. "They crossed a line," Emmanuel said quietly. Serigny nodded. "They always do. Do you want me to not yet?" Serena interrupted. "Let them finish." That evening, Serena cooked dinner, something he rarely had time to do. The food was simple. The care was not. "Mariatu," he said as they ate, "if this becomes too heavy." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Don't ask me to retreat," she said softly. "Ask me to stand." He met her gaze, something fierce and protective igniting behind his calm. "Then stand with me," he said. Days passed. The tension simmered. Kofi's company announced a major expansion. Headlines praised his vision. Yvonne flaunted success, openly posting photos captioned with thinly veiled jabs. and then quietly the ground began to shift. A project Kofi had rushed faced delays, permits stalled, investors hesitated. At a meeting late one night, Kofi slammed his folder shut. "Who's holding this up?" No one answered. Across the city, Serigny reviewed documents calmly, his name appearing on pages Kofi had never bothered to read closely. Back at home, Mariatu sensed the change not in headlines but in Serigny's stillness. "You're thinking," she said one night. "I'm preparing," he replied. "For what?" "For the moment when silence becomes noise." She smiled faintly. "You speak like a storm." Serena looked at her, a rare smile touching his lips. "Storms only scare people who build on sand." Mariatu did not yet understand what that meant, but she felt it. The laughter that once followed her had begun to sound uncertain, and somewhere beneath the city's glow, the first crack appeared in the foundation of those who had mistaken humility for weakness. The proposal did not come with music flowers or an audience. It came quietly, the way all honest things in Serigny Falls life did. Mariatu Kamara was folding finished dresses late one evening, the small room lit by a single bulb humming faintly above her. Her fingers ached, but her mind was calm. Serena sat nearby reviewing papers she had learned not to question. He always worked like that, focused, deliberate, carrying the weight of many decisions without ever announcing them. When she finished, she stretched and sighed softly. "You work too hard," Serigny said without looking up. "So do you," she replied, smiling. He set the papers aside and stood. For a moment he simply watched her, as if measuring something invisible. "Mariatu," he said. The way he said her name made her heart shift. "Yes, I know the world has already made this difficult for you," he continued. "I know loving me has cost you comfort, approval, and peace." She stepped closer. "I chose that." He nodded slowly. "Then I want to choose you too properly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. No diamond large enough to impress strangers, just a clean band carefully chosen. "I don't have promises of ease," he said, "but I promise effort, respect, and a life I will build with my own hands beside you." Mariatu felt her eyes burn, not because she was unsure, but because she had never been asked so honestly before. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Serena." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady. For a long moment they simply stood there holding each other, letting the quiet settle around them like a blessing. The storm came the next morning. Madame Hawa Kamara did not sit when Mariatu told her. She stood arms crossed, face tight with disbelief. "You accepted?" she asked sharply. "Yes," Mariatu replied, "to a builder." Her mother's voice cracked not with sadness but with fear. "To a good man." "A good man won't protect you from poverty," Madame Hawa snapped. "Do you know how people will laugh at us?" Mariatu met her gaze. "They already are." That was when Uncle Bashir Kamara arrived, as if summoned by tension itself. "I heard the news," he said without greeting. "Tell me it's not true." "It's true," Mariatu said calmly. Bashir scoffed. "You're throwing your life away." Serigny arrived moments later, having been invited reluctantly. He greeted them respectfully, his posture open, his tone measured. "I love your daughter," he said, "and I intend to marry her." Bashir laughed outright. With what cement Serene did not flinch. With responsibility. Madame Hawa shook her head. "Love doesn't feed children. It doesn't pay hospital bills. It doesn't build security." "I build every day," Serene replied evenly. "Just not the kind you measure yet." The meeting ended with no blessing. "You will regret this," Madame Hawa said quietly as Serene left. Mariatu did not respond. Regret had never scared her as much as living without truth. Word spread quickly through the family. Phone calls came from relatives who had never shown interest before, now full of advice and warning. "Think again. Be patient. Don't shame the family." Even Isa, too, though supportive, looked worried. "They're serious this time," she said gently. "They might cut you off." Mariatu nodded. "Then I'll stand without them." Serigny felt the weight of it more than he showed. That night he paced quietly in his modest apartment while Mariatu watched him. "You're thinking again," she said. "I don't want you to lose your family because of me," he admitted. She stepped in front of him. "Serigny, I'm not losing them because of you. I'm choosing myself." He exhaled slowly. "Then let me carry some of this." He requested one final meeting. The family gathered again, tension sharper than before. This time Serena spoke not as a guest, but as a man claiming his place. "I will not beg for respect," he said calmly, "but I will state this clearly. Mariatu will not suffer because she chose me." Bashir sneered. Bold words from a poor man. Serigny met his eyes. Poor men don't fear work, they fear truth. The room fell silent. Madame Hawa looked at her daughter, desperation flickering through her anger. "If you go through with this," she said, voice trembling, "don't come back crying." Mariatu nodded. Tears steady but contained. "I won't." The decision was final. The wedding would be small, simple, unapproved. As the date approached, the mockery grew louder. Kofi's name surfaced again, whispers of how Mariatu had chosen downward. Yvonne's laughter echoed online, thinly disguised as concern. Serigny said nothing. He only worked harder. Late one evening, Mr. Emmanuel Okonkwo visited Serigny quietly. "They're pushing too far," Emmanuel said. "You don't have to let this continue." Serigny shook his head. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because the truth means nothing until the lie finishes speaking." On the morning of the wedding, Mariatu dressed herself in a simple white gown, her hands trembling only slightly. Aissatou adjusted her veil, smiling through tears. "You look like courage," she said. Outside, only a handful of people waited. No grand procession, no applause. Serigny stood at the front, calm as stone. When Mariatu walked toward him, he looked at her as if the world had narrowed to that single moment. They exchanged vows softly, words meant only for each other. No one interrupted, no one mocked. But in the distance, judgment watched and waited. As they left hand in hand, Mariatu felt lighter than she ever had before. She didn't know that the simplicity of this moment, the lack of approval, the quiet courage was exactly what would make the reckoning to come so devastating. Because when a man like Serigny Fall chooses silence over defense, it is never because he has nothing to say. It is because he is waiting for the right moment to be heard. The wedding ended without applause, without cheers, without the blessings that usually followed a bride and groom into their new life. But it did not end without witnesses. As Mariatu Kamara and Serigny Fall stepped out of the small registry office, hand in hand, a few distant relatives stood across the street pretending to be busy on their phones while quietly recording the moment. Someone laughed softly. Someone shook their head. "That's it," a woman murmured. After all that drama, Mariatu heard it. She chose not to react. Serigny squeezed her hand, once firm, grounding. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "I've been ready longer than I knew." Their home was modest, 2 rooms, clean, honest, nothing hidden, nothing extravagant, when Mariatu placed her small suitcase by the door. The sound echoed louder than it should have. This is it, she thought. No turning back. That first night reality arrived without ceremony. The electricity flickered twice before going out completely. Mariatu laughed softly in the darkness. "Welcome to married life," she joked. Serigny lit a small lantern. "It gets better. I know," she said, meaning more than light. They lay on a thin mattress, listening to the city breathe around them. Cars passed. Voices drifted. Somewhere nearby, someone argued loudly. Somewhere else, someone sang. It was not the life people had wanted for her, but it was hers. The next morning came early. Serigny rose before dawn, careful not to wake her. Mariatu watched him quietly from half-closed eyes as he dressed in worn work clothes, tying his boots with practiced ease. "You don't have to leave so early," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Old habit." She sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I'll make breakfast." "You don't have to," he said. "I want to." They ate simple food in comfortable silence. Before leaving, Serigny paused at the door. "Mariatu," he said, hesitating slightly. "People will test you now." She smiled. "They already have." He nodded, studying her face as if memorizing it. "If it ever becomes too heavy, I'll tell you," she said firmly. He kissed her forehead and left. The world did not waste time reminding Mariatu of her new status. At the market, familiar faces turned cool. Some customers stopped coming altogether. Others arrived only to stare. "So you're married now," one woman said flatly. "To that builder." "Yes," Mariatu replied. "Must be hard." "It's honest," the woman snorted. "Honesty doesn't feed children." That phrase followed Mariatu everywhere, spoken like truth, used like a weapon. At home, Madame Hawa Kamara did not call. Days passed. Silence stretched thin and sharp. Uncle Bashir Kamara, however, had plenty to say. He visited unannounced one afternoon, surveying the small home with open disapproval. "So this is where you live now," he said. "You could have done better." Mariatu met his gaze steadily. I did what felt right. Bashir shook his head. You married struggle. Serigne entered quietly, having returned early. I married commitment, Serigne said calmly. Bashir laughed. Commitment won't save her when life gets hard. Serigne's eyes darkened not with anger, but certainty. Then I'll make sure it doesn't. The visit ended without warmth. That evening, Mariatu sat quietly folding laundry with careful precision. Does it bother you, Serigne asked gently, what that they think this way? She paused. It used to. But now, I think they're afraid of what that I didn't choose what they chose. The days settled into rhythm. Serigne left early. Mariatu worked long hours. Money was tight. Every expense was weighed, every purchase considered. There were nights Mariatu lay awake calculating silently, wondering if she had been selfish. But each morning Serigne returned with the same calm, the same presence, the same unspoken reassurance. One evening as they ate dinner, Serigne received a call. His tone shifted, not louder, not softer, but sharper. Yes, I understand. No, delay it. I'll handle it. He ended the call and noticed Mariatu watching. Work, she asked. Yes, he replied simply. She nodded. Trust did not need interrogation, but outside their small world the noise was growing. Photos from the wedding surfaced online taken without consent. Captions mocked the simplicity. Comments ridiculed Serigne's appearance. She married dust. Love fades when hunger arrives. Kofi Mensah liked one of the posts. Yvonne Mensah commented a laughing emoji. Mariatu saw it by accident. Her hands shook, not with shame, but with anger. That night she told Serigne. He listened quietly. They want a reaction, he said. I don't want revenge, she replied. I want dignity. Serigne reached for her hand. Then you'll have it. At the construction site, Serigne's workers watched him closely. You don't seem bothered, one said. Serigne smiled faintly. Noise doesn't move concrete. Behind closed doors, however, Serigne was anything but passive. He met with Mr. Emmanuel Okonkwo late one night. They're accelerating projects without approvals. Emmanuel said. Kofi is cutting corners. Serigne studied the documents calmly. Let him. You could stop this now. Serigne shook his head. Not yet. Back home, Mariatu waited. You're quieter lately, she said. I'm listening. Serigne replied. To what? To people revealing themselves. The first real test came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Mariatu's shop was vandalized, fabric torn, tools scattered, a message scratched crudely into the wall. You chose wrong. Mariatu stood frozen, heart pounding. Neighbors gathered. No one claimed responsibility. No one apologized. When Serigne arrived, his face hardened, but his voice remained calm. We'll fix it, he said. But why, Mariatu whispered. Why punish me for loving you? Serigne cupped her face gently. Because they think fear will make you return. She shook her head. It won't. That night, Serigne did not sleep. The next day, something shifted. A large contract Kofi had bragged about publicly was suddenly delayed. Investors grew quiet. Rumors spread small at first, then louder. Kofi grew irritable. Yvonne complained. What's happening? She asked him. Nothing, he snapped. Just paperwork. But behind the scenes, the foundation was cracking. Mariatu felt it not through news, but through Serigne's stillness. You're waiting, she said one evening. Yes, he answered. For the moment when they realized silence was never weakness. She leaned against him, feeling his steady heartbeat. For the first time since the wedding, Mariatu understood something clearly. They had mocked her for marrying a poor builder. But what they did not know, what they could not yet imagine, was that she had married a man who understood power so deeply he did not need to announce it. Not yet. The rumors began as whispers, the kind people pretended not to hear, but secretly repeated. Mariatu Kamara noticed them first at the market. A vendor leaned toward another, lowering her voice. They say Kofi's project is stalled. Which one? Someone asked. All of them. Mariatu kept her eyes on the fabric in her hands, her fingers steady even as her pulse quickened. She had learned not to celebrate too early. Life had taught her that balance could shift back just as quickly. At home, Serigne Fall said nothing. That silence was new. He still rose before dawn, still returned late, still carried the same calm, but there was a tightness beneath it now, a quiet focus that felt like the city holding its breath. One night, Mariatu found him standing by the window staring out at the lights. You're far away, she said softly. He turned to her. Just thinking. About what? About timing. She studied his face. Good or bad? He smiled faintly. Necessary. Days passed. Then, weeks. Kofi Mensah's name appeared less often online. His confident posts slowed, then stopped. Yvonne's glamorous photos felt forced captions, shorter smiles, tighter. At the construction site, Serena received visitors more frequently, men and women who spoke in low voices, who waited for privacy, who left with nods of respect. Mariatu noticed the subtle changes, the way people greeted Serena, the way phones went silent when he approached, the way Mr. Emmanuel Okonkwo treated him, not like a supervisor but like a pillar. One evening, Mariatu asked the question she had been avoiding. Serena, what's really happening? He hesitated. For the first time since she had known him, he looked unsure not of himself but of what to reveal. There are things I wanted to protect you from, he said slowly. She took his hand. I don't need protection from the truth. He searched her face, measuring her readiness not for shock but for trust. Kofi cut corners, Serena said finally. Permits, safety, labor contracts. And people like that don't fail because someone attacks them, he continued. They fail because they believe they're untouchable. Mariatu nodded. You knew. I suspected. She absorbed that quietly. Is that why you stayed silent? Yes. At that moment the phone rang. Serena glanced at the screen, then answered. Yes, I understand, tomorrow morning. He ended the call and met Mariatu's gaze. It's time, he said. For what? For the truth to start speaking. The next day, Mariatu received an unexpected call. Her mother. She stared at the phone for several seconds before answering. Mariatu, Madame Hawa Kamara said stiffly. I heard something. Mariatu's chest tightened. About what? About your husband, her mother replied. People are saying strange things. Mariatu closed her eyes briefly. Like what? That he's connected. That he's not who we thought. Mariatu said nothing. Her mother's voice softened, uncertainty creeping in. Is it true? Mariatu chose her words carefully. He is exactly who he said he was. Madame Hawa exhaled sharply. People don't change overnight, no, Mariatu replied, but assumptions do. The call ended without reconciliation, but something had shifted. Later that afternoon, Aissatou burst into Mariatu's shop breathless. You won't believe this, she said. Mariatu smiled faintly. Try me. Kofi's company is under investigation. The words landed quietly like a stone dropped into deep water. For what? Everything, Aissatou whispered. Safety violations, financial irregularities, insider contracts. Mariatu felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She did not rejoice. She remembered the night Kofi had laughed at her, how small she had felt. And now she understood something important. Power did not always look loud. That evening, Serena came home earlier than usual. We need to talk, he said. Mariatu sat across from him, heart steady. There's a board meeting tomorrow, he began. A large one. Are you attending? Yes. As a builder, she asked gently. He smiled. As myself. Her breath caught. What does that mean? It means, he said carefully, that everything changes after tomorrow. She studied him. For us? For everyone. Silence stretched between them, not heavy but charged. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked softly. Because I didn't want you to love an image, he replied. I wanted you to love me. She reached for his hand. I did. He squeezed back. I know. That night, Mariatu barely slept. Memories rose uninvited, the insults, the laughter, the loneliness. She wondered how the world would look at her tomorrow, and more importantly, how she would look at herself. Morning arrived too quickly. Serena dressed differently that day, still simple but sharper, cleaner, intentional. Do you want to come? He asked. Mariatu hesitated. Should I? He met her eyes. Only if you're ready. She took a breath. I am. The building was nothing like the dusty construction sites Mariatu had grown used to. Glass, steel, order. Inside, people moved with purpose. Names were exchanged quietly, decisions weighed carefully, and when Serenia walked in, something unmistakable happened. People stood. Mariatu noticed it immediately, the way conversations stopped, the way eyes followed him, the way respect replaced indifference. Kofi Mensah sat at the far end of the room, tension etched into his posture. Yvonne sat beside him, expression brittle. Serigna took his seat calmly. Mariatu felt the weight of the moment settle around her like a cloak. A voice called the meeting to order. As discussions unfolded, Mariatu watched Kofi unravel, interrupted, questioned, challenged. The confidence that once shielded him now cracked under scrutiny. Finally, the chairman spoke. Serigna Fall, he said you've been patient. Would you like to speak? Mariatu's heart pounded. Serigna stood. My colleagues, he began evenly. This industry doesn't fail because of lack of ambition. It fails when ambition forgets responsibility. Kofi shifted uncomfortably. I've spent years watching quietly, Serigny continued. Building, investing, listening. Mariatu realized something then, not with shock but clarity. This was not a reveal. This was a reckoning. Serigny spoke without arrogance, without spectacle. Facts replaced insults. Truth replaced noise. When he finished, the room was silent. The chairman nodded. Thank you, Serena. Kofi looked around, desperate for allies. He found none. As the meeting adjourned, people approached Serena with deference, hands extended, voices respectful. Mariatu stood slowly, her legs trembling. Serena turned to her and smiled the same smile he had offered her on a dusty road weeks ago. Are you okay? He asked quietly. She nodded. Tears welling. I think I finally understand. Understand what? That silence was never your weakness, she said. It was your choice. Outside, cameras waited. Questions buzzed. But Serena guided Mariatu past them calmly. Tomorrow, he said. Today is ours. As they stepped into the sunlight, Mariatu felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph, not revenge, but balance. And somewhere behind them, the laughter that once followed her faded into a sound no one bothered to listen to anymore. The city didn't wake up all at once to the truth. It woke up in fragments. By mid-morning, headlines had begun to circulate, carefully worded at first, then sharper with every passing hour. Investors whispered, phones rang, doors closed, and in offices where confidence had once lived comfortably, anxiety took its place. Mariatu Kamara felt the shift before she read a single article. At her shop, customers arrived with unfamiliar politeness. Some avoided her eyes. Others lingered, searching her face as if expecting her to change shape. So, your husband? One woman began cautiously. He's important. Mariatu folded her dress slowly. He's responsible. The woman nodded, embarrassed, and said no more. Across the city, Kofi Mensah sat in his office staring at a screen he could no longer control. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were postponed. His assistant avoided his gaze. Tell them I'll call back, he snapped for the third time. They've stopped asking, she replied quietly. Kofi slammed his phone onto the desk. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Serena Fall was a nobody. Yvonne stood near the window, arms crossed tightly. Nobody doesn't walk into a boardroom like that, she said coldly. Kofi shot her a look. You think I didn't notice? She turned to face him, eyes sharp. Then why didn't you look closer? The silence that followed was suffocating. By afternoon, news cameras gathered outside corporate buildings. Names were spoken with new respect. Others were spoken with caution. And one name, Serena Fall, began to carry weight. Mariatu learned this not from Serena, who remained characteristically quiet, but from Aissatou Diallo, who arrived breathless at her shop. They're talking about him everywhere, Aissatou whispered. They're calling him a major player, a silent investor, a kingmaker. Mariatu closed her eyes briefly. He never wanted that. I know, Aissatou said. That's why it's terrifying. That evening, Mariatu returned home to find Serena seated at the small table, sleeves rolled up, reading calmly. You didn't tell me they'd call it a scandal, she said gently. They always do, he replied. Scandals sell faster than truth. She sat across from him. Are you okay? He met her gaze. I've been preparing for this longer than anyone realizes, she nodded. And me? He smiled softly. You were never part of the preparation. You were the reason. The next morning brought the confrontation Mariatu had sensed was inevitable. Her mother arrived unannounced. Madame Hawa Kamara stood in the doorway, dressed carefully, eyes scanning the room as if reassessing its worth. Mariatu, she said stiffly. Mariatu stood. Mother. Madame Hawa cleared her throat. I heard some things. Mariatu waited. About your husband, her mother continued. About his business. Serigny entered the room quietly, nodding respectfully. Good morning, he said. Madame Hawa stiffened, unsure how to address him now. You didn't tell us, she said finally. Serigny's tone remained calm. You didn't ask. The words were not cruel. They were honest. Madame Hawa turned to her daughter. Is it true, all of it? Mariatu took a breath. Yes. Her mother sat down heavily, the weight of her own assumptions pressing down on her shoulders. I thought I was protecting you, she said quietly. I know, Mariatu replied. But protection built on fear is still a cage. Madame Hawa's eyes filled with tears she did not wipe away. People laughed at you, and I let them, Sirigny spoke gently. People laugh at what they don't understand. The visit ended without celebration, but with something closer to humility. Outside, the city was less forgiving. At a charity gala scheduled months earlier, one Kofi had once proudly announced attendance was thinner than expected. But the cameras were there hungry for reversal. Mariatu hesitated before entering. Do you want to do this? She asked Serena. Yes, he replied simply. It's time. They walked in together. The reaction was immediate. Whispers turned to gasps. Conversations stalled. Eyes followed them not dismissively this time, but cautiously calculatingly. Kofi stood near the bar, glass in hand, face pale. When he saw them, something in him collapsed. Mariatu, he called out, voice strained. Sirigny. They approached. I didn't know, Kofi said quickly, words tumbling over each other. If I had known, Sirigny held up a hand. You knew enough, Kofi swallowed. We can fix this. We're both in the same industry. We could. No, Sirigny interrupted quietly. We are not the same. Yvonne stepped forward, forcing a smile. This doesn't have to be awkward. Mariatu met her gaze steadily. It doesn't, unless you want it to be. The silence stretched. Cameras hovered. Kofi's voice dropped. You humiliated me. Sirigny's eyes hardened, not with anger but clarity. You humiliated yourself the moment you mistook kindness for weakness. Kofi had no response. As they walked away, Mariatu felt something lift from her chest. Not satisfaction, release. Later that night, footage of the encounter circulated widely. Commentators speculated, opinions divided. But one thing was clear, the narrative had shifted. At home, Mariatu finally asked the question that had been waiting between them. Why now? She asked. Why reveal yourself when you did? Sirigny leaned back thoughtfully. Because power used too early teaches nothing, and power used too late protects no one. She nodded slowly. You wanted them to learn. Yes, he said, and I wanted you to choose me without the noise. She smiled. I did. He reached for her hand, and I will never forget that. The next morning, invitations arrived, meetings, interviews, requests for appearances. Serene declined most of them. There will be time, he said, after the dust settles. But for Mariatu, the dust was still swirling. People who had once ignored her now greeted her warmly. Some apologized. Others pretended they always believed in her. She accepted none of it too easily, because she understood now the world did not change. Its masks did. As night fell, Mariatu stood by the window watching the city glow. They see us differently now, she said. Sirigny joined her. They see what they value. And what do you value? She asked. He looked at her, his expression steady. The woman who stood beside me when all I had was silence. Mariatu leaned into him, feeling the weight of the past loosen its grip. The storm was not over, but the ground beneath them was no longer fragile. And somewhere deep within the structures Kofi had built on arrogance and shortcuts, the collapse had already begun. The aftermath of the revelation did not arrive like a victory parade. It arrived like pressure. Everywhere Mariatu Kamara went, doors opened that had once been shut. Smiles appeared where suspicion used to live. Compliments replaced mockery with unsettling speed. The city adjusted its posture as cities always do when power reveals itself. Mariatu did not trust it. At her shop, customers returned in waves, some sincere, others curious, many calculating. We always admired your strength, one woman said, touching a dress she had once refused to buy. Mariatu smiled politely. Strength doesn't change the stitching. The woman laughed awkwardly and paid full price. At home, Sirigny Fall sifted through invitations stacked neatly on the table, meetings with investors, interviews with business journals, requests for public appearances. He declined most of them with a brief shake of his head. Why not speak now? Mariatu asked one evening. People are listening to what Sirigny replied, the story they want or the truth they need. She considered that. What's the difference? The first flatters them, he said. The second challenges them. That night the call came. It was from a number Sirigny had not expected to see again. Kofi Mensah. Serigna answered without hesitation. Kofi, he said evenly. There was a pause on the other end, then a strained breath. I need to see you. Mariatu watched Serigna's expression carefully. Why, Serigna asked. Because everything is falling apart, Kofi said, and you know why. Serigna closed his eyes briefly. Tomorrow, 10 minutes. When the call ended, Mariatu felt the air tighten. Do you trust him? She asked. No, Serigna replied. But I understand him. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe far from cameras and crowds. Mariatu chose not to attend. This was Serigna's terrain, and she respected that. Kofi arrived early, pacing like a man unaccustomed to waiting. Serigna walked in, calmly ordered tea, and sat. You've changed, Kofi said immediately. Serigna smiled faintly. You've just learned how to look. Kofi leaned forward, desperation sharpening his tone. I made mistakes. I admit that. But this investigation, it will destroy everything I've built. Serigna met his gaze. You destroyed it the moment you believed rules were for other people. Kofi swallowed. You could help me. Serigna's eyes hardened, not with cruelty but with finality. I won't save you from consequences. Kofi's voice cracked. You're enjoying this. No, Serigna replied quietly. I'm respecting it. When Serigna returned home, Mariatu was waiting. It's done, he said. She nodded. How do you feel? Tired, he admitted, but clean. The next days unfolded with careful precision. Investigations widened, contracts were suspended, partners distanced themselves. Kofi's name appeared less as a headline and more as a warning. Yvonne Mensah vanished from social circles, her social media accounts silent. The laughter that once followed Mariatu now had nowhere to go. But with the fall of one shadow, others emerged. At a formal industry forum, Serigna was invited to speak not as a spectacle, but as an authority. Mariatu sat among the audience, hands folded, heart steady. Serigna stood at the podium without flourish. We talk about growth as if it's numbers, he said, but growth without integrity is just expansion of damage. The room was silent. I built quietly, he continued. Because noise attracts attention, not trust. If we want an industry that lasts, we must value people before profits. Applause followed, not thunderous but respectful. Afterward, a young woman approached Mariatu. I didn't know who you were before, she said shyly, but I know now. Mariatu smiled gently. Then make sure you know who you are too. At home that evening, Mariatu felt the weight of a question she had been carrying. Serigna, she said softly, do you ever wish you had told me sooner? He considered that carefully. No. Why? Because I needed to know that when the world offered you comfort and applause, you would still choose truth, he said. And you did. She took his hand. I chose you. He smiled. That's more than enough. The city continued to adjust. Madame Hawa Kamara returned again, this time without pride or fear, only uncertainty. I was wrong, she said quietly, sitting across from her daughter. Not about money, about love. Mariatu listened. I thought safety was built from what people see, her mother continued. But I see now. It's built from who stands with you when no one else does. Mariatu reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We're all learning. The reconciliation was not dramatic. It was real. As weeks passed, Serigna accepted a new role, more visible, more demanding. He remained careful, deliberate. He refused to weaponize his story. Mariatu returned to her work with renewed purpose. She expanded her shop slowly, employing women who had been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. You don't have to prove anything, Isatu said one afternoon. Mariatu smiled. I'm not proving. I'm building. One evening, as the city settled into its familiar hum, Mariatu and Serigna walked together through the same dusty road where they had first met. You remember this place? Mariatu asked. I remember everything, Serigna replied. She stopped and faced him. The world sees you now. He nodded. But I see you. They stood there for a moment, grounded by memory and choice. The mockery had faded. The noise had shifted. But the lesson remained quiet, steady, unshakable. Because power, Mariatu had learned, did not need to announce itself. It only needed to be true. The fall never happens all at once. It unfolds in layers, quiet at first, then undeniable. By the time the official statements were released, the city already knew. Projects once celebrated were now listed under review. Bank partnerships paused pending clarification. Contractors scrambled to distance themselves from names that had grown toxic overnight. Kofi Mensah's name was among them. Mariatu Kamara did not read the reports immediately. She felt no urgency to witness another person's collapse. What reached her instead were the echoes, the tone of conversations, shifting around her, the careful way people now spoke when her name came up. Serigna's wife, they said. Not Mariatu, not the tailor, not the woman who had been mocked for marrying a builder. The change unsettled her more than the insults ever had. At home, Serene Fall remained composed, but the pace of his days intensified. Meetings stretched late into the night, files piled higher. Calls came from cities Mariatu had never visited, names she had never heard. One evening, as Serena reviewed documents at the table, Mariatu poured tea and set it down beside him. "You're carrying a lot," she said. He looked up, tired but calm. "This is the cost of visibility." She hesitated. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "I regret only the damage done before accountability arrived." She nodded, understanding more than she said. The Industry Council announced a special hearing, public, thorough, unavoidable. Serene was asked to testify not as a defendant, but as a witness with knowledge no one could dispute. The morning of the hearing, Mariatu stood by the door, smoothing the front of his jacket. "You don't have to come," Serena said gently. "I want to," she replied. This affected us both. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was heavy with expectation. Journalists lined the walls. Officials sat rigidly, pens poised. Cameras waited for spectacle. Serena delivered none. He spoke with precision, dates, contracts, omissions. He named failures without dramatizing them. He refused to embellish. When Kofi Mensah's name was mentioned, a murmur rippled through the room. Kofi sat several rows back, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. He did not look at Mariatu. Serigna finished calmly. The chairman thanked him. The cameras clicked. Outside, reporters pressed forward, voices overlapping. "Mr. Fall, was this personal? Did you act out of revenge? Is this about your wife?" Serena raised a hand, silencing them. "This is about responsibility," he said evenly. "Nothing more." Mariatu felt something tighten and then release in her chest. That evening, the city reacted loudly. Opinions split, debates flared. Some praised Serena's restraint. Others accused him of calculated patience. A few tried to recast Mariatu as the silent beneficiary of a man's power. She refused the label. At her shop, Mariatu met with women she had hired over the past weeks, each with a story that echoed her own. "They laughed when I asked for fair pay," one said. "They said I should be grateful," another added. "They said I should marry better," a third murmured. Mariatu listened. Then she spoke. "This place exists because dignity doesn't need permission," she said, "and neither do you." They worked late into the night, stitching not just garments, but something sturdier, belonging. The following day brought another test. Madame Hawa Kamara arrived with Uncle Bashir in tow. He looked smaller than Mariatu remembered, less sure of his footing, less convinced of his authority. "I heard about the hearing," Bashir said gruffly. "It's serious." "Yes," Mariatu replied. "It is." He cleared his throat. "We didn't know about Serena." Mariatu met his gaze. "You didn't want to." Silence followed. Bashir shifted uncomfortably. "I said things I shouldn't have." Serigna entered, then greeting them politely. Bashir stood abruptly. "I was wrong," he said stiffly. "About both of you." Serigna nodded once. "Acknowledgement matters." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. As weeks passed, the consequences solidified. Licenses were revoked, penalties announced. Kofi's company dissolved quietly, piece by piece, sold to settle debts and claims. One evening, Serena received a final message. Kofi wanted to meet again. Mariatu watched Serena read it, then set the phone down. "Will you go?" she asked. "No," he said simply. "There's nothing left to say." That night, Mariatu lay awake thinking of the past, the laughter, the shame, the smallness she had been taught to accept. She realized something then with surprising clarity. The reversal wasn't the point. The point was that she no longer needed it. The next morning, Mariatu was invited to speak at a local women's forum, not as a symbol, but as a builder in her own right. She stood before a modest crowd and spoke plainly. "They told me love was a risk," she said. "They were right, but not the way they meant." She spoke of choosing integrity when convenience beckoned, of patience mistaken for weakness, of silence used not to hide but to listen. Applause followed, not loud but genuine. Afterward, a young girl approached her. "My family says I should choose safety," the girl said nervously. "What should I do?" Mariatu smiled gently. "Choose truth first. Safety follows those who stand." At home, Serene listened as Mariatu recounted the day. "You were brave," he said. She shook her head. "I was honest," he smiled. "That's braver." The city continued to adjust, but the storm had passed its peak. The noise faded. What remained was structure stronger for having been tested. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, Mariatu looked out at the lights and spoke softly. "They mocked me for marrying a poor builder." Serigna nodded, and now she continued. He took her hand. "Now they know better." She leaned into him, feeling the steadiness she had always chosen. The world had learned something, but more importantly, so had she. If the earlier days had been about revelation, this one was about reckoning. The invitation arrived, stamped with formality and finality. A continental construction summit hosted in the capital, gathering ministers, financiers, regulators, and executives from across the region. It was the kind of event where decisions reshaped markets quietly without applause. Serigna Fall had been invited to sit on the main panel. Mariatu Kamara read the letter twice, then looked up. "This is bigger than anything before." Serigna nodded. "That's why it matters." The morning of the summit, the city felt unusually still. Streets were cleared, security tightened. Inside the vast conference hall, voices hummed with cautious expectation. Old alliances were recalculated, new ones were tested. Mariatu took her seat among invited guests, her posture composed, her heart steady. She did not feel like an outsider. She felt prepared. When Serene entered the hall, the reaction was immediate but restrained. Heads turned, conversations paused, hands adjusted ties. Respect moved through the room like a low current. He did not seek it. He accepted it as one accepts responsibility. The opening remarks passed quickly. Data was presented, challenges acknowledged. Then the moderator addressed the panel. "Today," he said, "we will speak about sustainability, governance, and the cost of shortcuts." Serene listened carefully as others spoke well-polished arguments. Cautious promises. When his turn came, he stood without notes. "We keep asking how to grow." Serena began calmly. "But we rarely ask who pays when growth is careless." The room quieted. "Every collapsed project leaves behind more than broken concrete," he continued. "It leaves unpaid workers, unsafe communities, and distrust that lingers for years." Mariatu felt the weight of his words settle into the hall, not heavy but firm. Serigny did not name Kofi Mensah. He did not need to. The absence was louder than accusation. "We must choose standards that survive scrutiny," he said, "and leadership that does not require applause to do what is right." A pause followed long enough to feel deliberate. Then applause came, measured, respectful, real. After the panel, officials approached Sereni with questions that mattered: policy frameworks, enforcement mechanisms, long-term investment ethics. He answered carefully, refusing to oversimplify. Mariatu watched not with awe, but with recognition. This was the same man who had carried planks without complaint, who had chosen silence when noise would have been easier. Later, in a side corridor away from cameras, a familiar voice called her name. Mariatu. She turned to see Yvonne Mensah. Yvonne looked different, less polished, more guarded. Her eyes held calculation mixed with something close to regret. "I didn't expect to see you here," Yvonne said. Mariatu's tone was calm. "I didn't expect you to come." Yvonne exhaled sharply. "Things changed. They always do." Mariatu replied. A beat passed. "I said things," Yvonne admitted. "I laughed when I shouldn't have." Mariatu studied her, searching for sincerity. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the room has shifted," Yvonne said quietly, "and I need to know where I stand." Mariatu's answer was simple. "Stand on truth. It holds better than strategy." Yvonne nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement, then she walked away. As the day drew to a closed-door session was convened. Only regulators and select advisors. Serignan was invited. He turned to Mariatu before entering. "I'll be a while," he said. "I'll be right here," she replied. The meeting lasted hours. Inside, decisions were made that would reshape oversight across projects: new audits, clearer labor protections, stricter safety thresholds. It wasn't glamorous. It was necessary. When Serigny emerged, fatigue touched his face, but so did resolve. "It's done," he said quietly. "What does that mean?" Mariatu asked. "It means the industry will be slower," he replied, "and safer." They left the hall together under fading daylight. Outside, reporters gathered again, questions ready. Mr. Falwon called out, "Is this the end of corruption in construction?" Serigny paused. "It's the end of pretending it's someone else's problem." At home that night, Mariatu prepared a simple meal. They ate in companionable silence, letting the day settle. "Do you ever miss being invisible?" Mariatu asked softly. Serigny smiled faintly. "Invisibility is a tool. Visibility is a duty." She nodded. "And duty?" He met her gaze. "Duty is staying human." The next morning brought a quieter headline. No scandal, no spectacle. Just a summary of policy outcomes and acknowledgments of cooperation. Mariatu preferred it that way. At her shop, work continued. Orders increased steadily. Not because of Serigny's name, but because Mariatu's work had always been good. A woman approached her counter hesitantly. "I heard you speak last week." Mariatu looked up. "Thank you." "It helped," the woman said. "I quit a job where they treated me like a favor." Mariatu smiled. "Then you've already built something." That evening, Mariatu and Serigny returned to the dusty road where they had first met. The construction site had transformed, structured, organized, safer. Workers moved with confidence. "Do you see?" Serigny asked. "I do." Mariatu replied. "Not the buildings, the people." They stood there as dusk fell, the air cooling the city, breathing easier. For the first time since the truth had emerged, Mariatu felt the final piece click into place. The mockery had not been erased. It had been answered, not with humiliation, not with dominance, but with systems that held. And as they walked home together, Mariatu understood the quiet power of what they had done. They had not reversed the world. They had steadied it. The public did not wait long for a symbol. After systems were announced and policies revised, people wanted a face to attach meaning to the shift. They wanted a moment they could point to and say, "That's when everything changed." They got it sooner than expected. The announcement came quietly, at first buried in a business bulletin released early in the morning. A major multinational construction consortium had finalized a restructuring deal. Several underperforming subsidiaries were dissolved. Others were absorbed under new leadership. At the center of it all was one name: Serigny Fall. By noon, it was everywhere. Mariatu Kamara was arranging bolts of fabric when her phone began vibrating non-stop. Messages stacked faster than she could open them. "Have you seen the news? They're saying your husband is now chairman. This is unbelievable." She set the phone down and closed her eyes, breathing slowly. When Serigny came home that evening, he looked the same as always. Tired, calm, unhurried. He loosened his jacket and sat beside her. "You saw it," he said. "Yes," she replied. "They finally gave it a title." He smiled faintly. "Titles help people understand." "And you?" she asked. "Do you need it?" "No," he said, "but others do." The next day brought the moment the city had been holding its breath for. A formal press briefing was scheduled, not flashy, not theatrical, just facts, statements, and accountability. Serigny insisted Mariatu attend not as decoration, but as witness. The hall filled quickly. Journalists took their seats. Executives lined the walls. Security remained unobtrusive but firm. Mariatu noticed familiar faces, people who had once looked through her, now studying her carefully. Then she saw him. Kofi Mensah stood near the back. He looked smaller than she remembered. His suit hung slightly loose as if it no longer belonged to him. His posture carried the weight of a man who had lost more than money. Their eyes met briefly. Mariatu felt no triumph, only distance. Serigny stepped to the podium as the room quieted. "This restructuring is not a takeover," he began evenly. "It is a correction." The words cut through the room without drama. "For years, shortcuts were mistaken for strategy," he continued. "That ends today." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Fall, critics say this move is personal." Serigny met the question without flinching. "Personal choices shape professional outcomes," he replied, "but governance is not revenge." Another question followed. "What message does this send?" Serigny paused. "That integrity compounds," he said, "and neglect collects interest." Murmurs rippled through the room. When the briefing ended, cameras flashed, voices overlapped, but one moment froze everything. Kofi stepped forward. The room stilled. "Sirigna," Kofi said, voice tight. "I need to speak with you." Sirigny looked at him calmly. "Here, yes," Kofi replied. "Here is fine." Everyone watched. "I underestimated you," Kofi said, words forced but clear. "I underestimated what you stood for. And I paid for it." Silence followed. Mariatu felt every eye flicker toward her, waiting, measuring, expecting reaction. Sirigny nodded once. "You underestimated yourself first." Kofi swallowed. "Is there anything left for me?" Sirigny answered without hesitation. "There is accountability and rebuilding if you choose to do it honestly." Kofi looked down, then back up, and Mariatu stepped forward before Sirigny could respond. "You don't need my forgiveness to change," she said calmly, "but you won't borrow my silence again." Kofi's shoulders sagged. He nodded, stepped back, and disappeared into the crowd. The moment passed, but its echo did not. That afternoon, the story shifted permanently. They mocked her, but they were wrong. At Mariatu's shop, women gathered not to gossip but to listen. "You stood there like you belonged," one said softly. Mariatu smiled. "I always did." At home, Madame Hawa Kamara watched the evening news in silence. When Mariatu joined her, her mother reached for her hand. "I taught you to fear poverty," she said quietly. "But I didn't teach you to fear smallness." Mariatu squeezed her hand. "We're still learning." That night, Sirigny and Mariatu sat together on the balcony, the city spread out below them like a constellation of quiet decisions. "Do you feel vindicated?" Sirigny asked. Mariatu thought for a long moment. "No," relieved. "Yes," she said, "and free." He nodded. Freedom lasts longer. The days that followed were filled with transitions, new leadership teams, revised contracts, quiet apologies disguised as introductions. Mariatu expanded her workshop again, this time into a training space. She hired women who had never been given a chance and taught them not just skills, but standards. "You don't need to be loud to be seen," she told them. "You need to be solid." Sirigny watched from a distance, proud but unobtrusive. One evening, a young reporter asked Mariatu a question as they left an event. "What was the turning point?" he asked. "The moment you knew everything would change." Mariatu considered. "Nothing changed all at once," she said. "People just stopped mistaking noise for truth." As they walked away, Sirigny glanced at her. "You've become very precise with words." She smiled. "I had good examples. The city moved on as cities do. New scandals emerged. New faces rose. But the story of the woman mocked for marrying a poor builder lingered not as gossip, but as reference, a reminder. Because when Sirigny Fall finally stood fully in the light, it wasn't to prove who he was. It was to confirm what he had always been. And Mariatu Kamara stood beside him, not elevated, not overshadowed, just steady. Power once revealed has a strange effect on people. Some rush toward it hoping to warm themselves by association. Others step back afraid of standing too close to what might expose them. Mariatu Kamara noticed both reactions in the days following the press briefing. Invitations multiplied. Apologies arrived wrapped in politeness. Old acquaintances reintroduced themselves with carefully softened memories. She accepted none of it blindly. Sirigny Fall moved through the city with measured purpose. His days were filled with meetings that mattered and decisions that would outlast headlines. He refused celebratory banquets and declined interviews that sought drama instead of substance. When asked why, he answered simply, "Work doesn't need applause." Mariatu understood that better than anyone. One afternoon, Sirigny asked her to join him at a community site on the outskirts of the city, an unfinished housing project abandoned years earlier after funds disappeared. The structures stood half-built, skeletal reminders of promises broken. "This place?" Mariatu asked softly. "This place?" Sirigny replied. "We're restarting it." Workers gathered as they arrived, men and women with cautious hope etched into their faces. Sirigny spoke to them plainly. "We'll finish this," he said. "On schedule, with safety, with pay that arrives on time." A murmur rippled through the crowd, skepticism mixed with relief. Mariatu watched the faces change as clarity replaced doubt. She recognized the look. It was the look of people who had been underestimated too often. As they walked through the site, a familiar voice called out, "Sirigny." They turned to see Uncle Bashir Kamara standing awkwardly near a pillar, his confidence replaced by hesitation. He cleared his throat. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, Bashir said. They say you're fixing what others abandoned. Serena nodded. We're finishing what should have been finished. Bashir glanced at Mariatu. I said harsh things. Mariatu met his gaze steadily. You spoke from fear. Bashir exhaled. I don't want to be remembered for that. Then don't be, Serena said evenly. Do better. Bashir nodded, chastened. I will. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was direction. That evening, Mariatu received a call she hadn't expected. Ivan Mensah. I heard about the housing project, Ivan said quietly. I wanted to say something. Mariatu listened. I was cruel, Ivan continued, because it was easier than admitting I was afraid. Afraid of what Mariatu asked, that you chose differently and survived. Ivan replied. Mariatu paused. Survival wasn't the goal. Ivan sighed. I know that now. They ended the call without warmth or hostility, just truth spoken late. The reckoning reached its peak a week later at a public forum on urban development open to workers, residents, and officials. Serigna was asked to speak, but he requested that Mariatu share the stage. I build systems, he said. She builds people. The room filled quickly. Cameras were present, but they did not dominate. This audience wanted answers, not spectacle. Mariatu stepped forward, heart steady. They mocked me for marrying a poor builder. She began, her voice calm. What they really mocked was patience, dignity, quiet work. Heads nodded. Murmurs of agreement followed. We confuse volume with value, she continued. But the structures that last are built slowly, honestly, and together. Applause rose, not thunderous, but deep. During questions, a man stood. What do you say to those who humiliated you? Mariatu considered carefully. I say thank you. The room stilled. Because they taught me how loud fear can be, she said, and how quiet courage must be to endure it. After the forum, a young couple approached her. Our families are against us, the woman said nervously. They say we should wait until we have more. Mariatu smiled gently. Have enough truth first. The rest follows. At home that night, Serena poured tea and sat beside her. You didn't need to stand with me today, he said. She smiled. I chose to. He nodded, eyes warm. You always do. The city continued to recalibrate. Contracts were rewritten, standards enforced. People learned to ask better questions. The old laughter, the kind that fed on weakness, had nowhere left to land. One afternoon, Mariatu returned to the hotel where Kofi had once humiliated her. The lobby looked the same, polished, indifferent. She stood where she had stood before, feeling the echo of that night. A manager approached, nervous. Mrs. Fall, is everything all right? Mariatu smiled softly. Everything is balanced. She left without ceremony. Later that week, Serena received a letter, handwritten brief. Kofi Mensah has enrolled in a compliance program and taken a junior advisory role at a small firm outside the city. Serena read it once and set it aside. Do you feel anything? Mariatu asked. Closure, he replied, and a boundary. As the housing project neared completion, residents gathered for a modest opening. No ribbon cutting, no speeches beyond thanks. Children ran through doorways that had once been empty promises. Mariatu stood with a woman who had waited years for this moment. They forgot us, the woman said, tears shining. They didn't forget, Mariatu replied. They chose not to see. The woman nodded. Thank you for making them look. That night, under a sky softened by city lights, Mariatu and Serigny walked home hand in hand. They mocked me, Mariatu said quietly, almost to herself. And now, Serigny asked. Now, she replied, they learn. He smiled. That's enough. The reckoning had arrived, not with humiliation, but with restoration. And in its wake, something stronger stood where mockery once lived. The city did not celebrate the end of the story. It absorbed it. Life continued with the quiet resilience it always had, but something underneath had shifted, subtle, irreversible. People walked a little straighter. Questions were asked where silence once ruled, and the laughter that used to feed on humiliation now sounded out of place, even to those who once enjoyed it. Mariatu Kamara felt that shift most clearly in the smallest moments. In her workshop, the women she trained worked with confidence that did not need permission. They spoke up when something was wrong. They negotiated without apology. They planned futures that no longer depended on approval from people who had never built anything with their own hands. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across bolts of fabric, Aissatou Diallo leaned against the doorway and smiled. You know, she said they stopped calling you the builder's wife. Mariatu looked up. What do they call me now? Just Mariatu, Aisatu replied. Like it was always supposed to be. Mariatu smiled, feeling something settle comfortably in her chest. Across the city, Serine Fall stood on a construction site that once would have been dismissed as unprofitable. Workers moved with steady purpose. Safety signs were clear. Wages were paid on time. The noise of progress felt different here, not frantic, not desperate, but sure. A young engineer approached him, hesitant but determined. Sir, he said, people say you changed the industry. Serine shook his head gently. People change industries. Systems only follow. The engineer nodded, absorbing the lesson. That evening, Mariatu and Serine returned home together, tired in the way that comes from meaningful work. They sat quietly listening to the distant sounds of the city settling into night. Do you ever think about that first day? Mariatu asked softly. The road, the dust. Serine smiled faintly. Often. I didn't know who you were, she said. You knew enough, he replied. She leaned back, thinking of the insults, the laughter, the way her name had once been spoken as a warning instead of a person. They mocked me for marrying a poor builder, she said quietly. Serine nodded. They mocked what they didn't understand. And now she asked. Now he said they understand that dignity doesn't announce itself. There was a knock at the door. Mariatu opened it to find her mother standing there. No anger, no fear, just uncertainty softened by time. I was nearby, Madame Hawa Kamara said awkwardly. I thought I'd check in. Mariatu stepped aside. Come in. They sat together in the modest living room that had once been judged so harshly. Madame Hawa looked around, not with disappointment, but with recognition. You built something here, she said quietly. Mariatu nodded. We did. Her mother hesitated, then spoke. I spent my life chasing security. I thought fear would protect you. Mariatu reached for her hand. It didn't protect you either. Madame Hawa's eyes filled. No, it didn't. Serena entered the room, greeting her politely. There was no tension now, only acceptance shaped by humility. I'm glad you came, he said. Madame Hawa met his gaze. So am I. The visit ended without ceremony, but with something stronger than approval. Peace. Days later, the housing project opened quietly. Families moved into homes built with care instead of shortcuts. Children laughed in corridors that had once been exposed concrete and broken promises. A man approached Mariatu holding the keys to his new apartment. I lost faith, he said, not in buildings, in people. Mariatu smiled gently. Faith grows back when it's given room. Serigna stood beside her, watching not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from headlines. New scandals replaced old ones. The world moved on. But for those who had watched closely, something remained. They remembered the woman who had stood still under mockery and refused to shrink. They remembered the man who had worn humility like armor. They remembered that power, when used to restore instead of dominate, leaves behind something stronger than fear. One evening, Mariatu and Serine walked through the market where whispers had once followed her like shadows. Now, vendors greeted her warmly, not because of status, but because respect had replaced curiosity. A young girl tugged at Mariatu's sleeve. My mother says I should marry someone important, the girl said shyly. Mariatu crouched to meet her eyes. Marry someone honest, she said. Importance changes. The girl nodded solemnly, as if receiving a secret meant only for her. As the sun dipped low, Serigny took Mariatu's hand. Do you regret anything, he asked? She thought carefully. Only the time I spent believing I had to prove my worth. He smiled. You never did. They stood there surrounded by ordinary life, the kind that continues long after stories end. Because this story was never about wealth revealed too late or revenge served cold. It was about patience, mistaken for weakness, about dignity tested and not surrendered, about choosing love when the world demands strategy. And in the end, it was about learning that true power does not silence others, it steadies them. This story is not really about wealth construction empires or public reversals of fortune. It is about how the world treats you when it thinks you are small and who you become when you refuse to let that define you. Mariatu was mocked not because she married a poor builder, but because she chose dignity over approval. truth over convenience and love over fear. Serigna did not win because he was secretly powerful. He won because he never needed power to be humane. Together they remind us that character is revealed long before success arrives, and that patience is not weakness, it is preparation. Life often tests us in silence. It places us in rooms where we are underestimated, laughed at, or dismissed. In those moments, the easiest response is to grow loud, bitter, or desperate to prove ourselves. But this story teaches a harder, deeper lesson. Real strength does not rush to defend itself. It builds. It endures. And when the time comes, it stands without needing to shout. Karma does not always arrive with drama. Sometimes it comes quietly through consistency, integrity, and choices made when no one is watching. And when it arrives, it does not just elevate one person, it restores balance. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been underestimated, judged, or mocked for choosing what felt right instead of what looked impressive? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We read everyone. And if you believe in stories about humanity, resilience, and hope that still matter in the real world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are coming, stories that remind us who we are and who we can become.